The Torah in Parsha Chayei Sara tells the account of the first shlichus, the first emissary, which was the servant of Avraham named Eliezer, and he was sent to find a wife for the son of Avraham, for Yitzchak. Now, we know the concept of shlichus, and being an emissary is not just a technical halachic status of sending someone to do a job for you that accounts for you, but it's actually a way of life that the Rebbe made very central to how we as Chassidim, and in general, the Jews of our generation, have to live our lives, saying that shlichus is the calling of the generation. Every Jew is a shliach of Hashem and should live as an emissary of Hashem to their families, to their part of the world, to bring Mashiach over there. So in order to find out what is the uniqueness of this concept called shlichus, we need to analyze the story of Eliezer, and particularly, there's a lot of what shlichus is captured in a musical note, a trup, one of the cantillations written in the Torah in the story of Eliezer. It's actually a very rare musical note, mentioned only 4 times in the Torah, and actually it's written in back-to-back Parshas last week and this week. Something that's only mentioned 4 times in the entire Torah are found both in Parshas Vayera and in Parshas Chayei Sara. This note is called the shalsheles, which looks like a lightning bolt or a long zigzag, and it also sounds like a zigzag. The word in this week's Parsha is when Eliezer is going to find a wife for Yitzchak. He asks Hashem for a sign, and he tells Hashem, whichever girl will come to me, will have such good character, will come to me and say, will offer me water, and won't only offer me water, but will also offer water to my camels. That will be the girl that's going to be the wife of Yitzchak. And as he's turning to Hashem to ask him to give him this sign, it says that lightning bolt cantillation is on the word Vayoymar, and he turned to Hashem and said, and it's read Vayoymar. It's like that up and down zigzag, both in its shape and in the note of how it's pronounced. Last week by Lot, you have the same thing, that Lot, when he was told to leave Sodom, by the angels, because Hashem was about to destroy Sodom, but that's where his fame, that's where his money, that's where his family was, and he hesitated on leaving. On that word, and he hesitated, vayismama, you have that same shalsheles, vayismama. And there's a famous rabbinic commentary on the shalsheles that it actually represents a state of mind. This is a explanation made famous by the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Al Vashalom, whose yahrzeit is actually around now, Chav Cheshvan. And he says that the concept of the shalsheles represents ambivalence or cognitive dissonance or not being able to make up your mind and being pulled between 2 ideas. So by Lot was pulled between 2 ideas. On the one hand, he wanted to remain in Sodom, that's where his whole life was, that's where his family was, that's where his comfort was. He finally made it as one of the Sodomites. He made it in America. But on the other hand, he knew that the angels would mean business and that he should go back to Avram and he should leave Sodom. And he was pulled between both ideas. That's why on that word, vayismama, and he hesitated, it says that shalsheles, to show that he was pulled in both directions and wasn't sure which way to go. That's the meaning of this musical note, the shalsheles. Over here too, by Eliezer, when he was talking to Hashem, asking to be successful on his shlichus, he also hesitated. And so it says, Vayoymar, with that same shalsheles. The Medrash says that Eliezer had a daughter that he wanted to marry off to Yitzchak, to his master's son. And Avram refused and told him to go find a wife elsewhere. So Eliezer, on the one hand, had tension, was pulled in 2 directions. On the one hand, he was the faithful servant of Avraham and wanted his mission to succeed. But on the other hand, he was his own man too, had his own heart and had his own mind, and wanted that maybe his daughter would marry Yitzchak. So when he's asking Hashem to be successful on his mission, and he means that sincerely, but there's another voice in him that's saying, but I also want my daughter maybe to be the one. And in that tension of saying, Hashem, please make me succeed, we see that Vayoymar, we see that shalsheles saying, on the one hand, I'm pulled because I want the will of my emissary to be successful, but on the other hand, I also want me to be successful. And this duality of Eliezer, on the one hand being his own man, but on the other hand being the extension of the one who sent him, is the tension of the shalsheles, and that's why we see it repeated over here as well. And this duality is exactly what shlichus is. It's highlighted many times throughout the Sichos that being a shliach does not mean being a puppet that doesn't have any more my own agenda, doesn't have my own vision for success, doesn't mean someone that doesn't have their own ego or their own mind or their own heart or their own ambitions. It means someone that does have their own ego, that does have their own mind and their own way of seeing things, but that's able to somehow harmonize that with the will of the one who's sending me, and to live primarily based on my shlichus. That even though it's hard for me and I do have ambivalence and there's tension inside of me, a shalshelas inside of me that's sometimes pulling me in my own direction, and then I need to remind myself to go back to live as the emissary of the one who sent me. And for that to be my main calling, but on the one hand not to do that just by canceling my ego and pretending that I'm an angel and no longer human, but to be able to balance living by the emissary, living as an emissary from the one who sent me, and at the same time trying to harmonize that by living as my own man, with my own ambitions, to use my mind creatively, to use my heart and my unique personality and my character, but not that it should be a clash with the shlichus. It should be a harmony, and it should be a work in musical unison. My ego, my will should be aligned with the will of the one who sent me, shouldn't be cancelled. As we say in Pirkei Avos, on the one hand, batel ritzoncha mipnei ritzonai, nullify your will to the will of God. But on the other hand, asay ritzonai kirtzoncha, make His will your will. We do want you to remain having your will. On the one hand, we're meant to nullify our will to the will of God, to the will of the one who sent us. But at the same time, we shouldn't really cancel out our will. The whole point is that the will of our sender should also become our will and should be harmonized with our lower selves as well. And this duality of shlichus, which is living in constant tension, right? It means on the one hand being a realistic human being, someone with an ego, someone that critically thinks, feels, and is honest with themselves, but at the same time only uses that as a step two towards fulfilling the shlichus, and primarily lives by Eved Avraham Anochi, lives by the concept of I'm a servant of the one who sent me, I'm a servant of Abraham. Now, if this is a shlichus of Eliezer, perhaps this is a negative. Perhaps the ideal is that we're meant to be egoless and just live by the will of God and be a clean funnel for His will to come through us without any of our own voices. And for this we see that another uniqueness of this story of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, that the Torah repeats the story not only once, but the entire story is repeated twice. As the Medrash says, this takes up a few columns of the Torah, one of the longest stories repeated in Torah. Why? Because Yafa Sichasan Shel Avdei Avos. It is beautiful, the talk of the servants of the forefathers, even greater than the Torah of their children. The Torah taught by the sages is very holy, but the struggle of being a shliach is ultimately what humanity is about. What Hashem finds beautiful, what Hashem finds yafa, is Sichasan Shel Avdei Avos, the human talk of the servants of the forefathers, people who are servants, people who are naturally maybe feel low, feel disconnected, but on the other hand are able to suspend that and with Kabbalah soul just live out the mission of the one who sent them, and not just be clean funnels of Torah scholars. For that we have holy saints. What Hashem really created the world for, and what Hashem really created humanity for, is to be that shliach that's caught in the shalshelas, that's caught in the constant tension between their own ego and trying to suspend that, to live by the will of the one who sent us. And that for that Hashem says, I find beautiful, and it's worth adding columns of Torah just to show that this is really what I cherish. And that's the calling of all of us. As the Rebbe tells us in our generation, every Jew is a shliach of Hashem, that we are a very human generation. We are not holy saints, but that doesn't mean we're second-class Jews. That means we could live out this musical shalshelas of, on the one hand, of balancing living as normal humans with an ego, critical thinking, healthy emotions, and have our own ambitions and will and desires of life, but to be able to suspend that and to not make that a primary voice of our life and what drives us, but to make the primary voice of what drives us, Eved Avraham Anochi, living out my shlichus. And our job is to try to balance that tension and to use ourselves as a way of channeling that shlichus to the world around us. To end with a story, there's a famous story of someone who went to the Alter Rebbe, that he was impressed with another chassidus that was headed by a Rebbe named Reb Chaikel. And he said, I went to the shul of Reb Chaikel, and I see his students, they brennen, they're burning alive, they're burning in the flame of prayer, they're fiery, they're burning. That was his term. And he said, the Alter Rebbe, we don't see the same thing by your chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe said, Nein, they brennen nicht. Chaikel brennt in them. The Alter Rebbe said, no, you're getting it wrong. They are not burning up. Chaikel the Rebbe is burning in them. In other words, he was saying that the way this Reb Chaikel would relate with his chassidim was he would completely take them over. There was no more them. The chassid that you see lit up in davening was not the chassid. The chassid canceled himself to be taken over by his Rebbe. What the Alter Rebbe demanded of his chassidim was that they should be them. They should be people grounded in themselves, but at the same time that they, as them, should be able to light up with the fire of the Alter Rebbe. That's the duality of living as a shliach, and that's the point of Dir B'Tachtonim. The point of creation is for this lower world. As the lower world, people with egos should be able to funnel humility and selflessness of God and the mission of God through themselves, and to balance, on the one hand, being a tachton, being a member of this world, but not as being a primary member of this world, but being someone who's primarily a channel for the will of God to be brought down to this world. And this is what Hashem finds beautiful, and is ultimately the purpose of Torah and creation. Have a great Shabbos.